Hey, crew. How's everybody doing today? We have a small group, so turn on your camera. Let's see your wigs. Your futurist spirit. Do we have a Lita and a Rob in the house? There we go. Very good. So I asked you a question when you were in the waiting room. I'd love if you would answer that question here. What you're here for, what you're looking for. You can type it into the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. Lita's back with us. Welcome back, Lita. All right, Morgan, let me copy it again. It's a simple question. Share why you're here, what you're attracted to, and what you're looking to get from this workshop. Ooh, it says Rob cannot unmute. Can we fix that, Catherine? Definitely want Rob to have a voice.
It might be a mistake.
There you go. And that might be a mistake. Okay. Lita's interested in this knowledge for the future. Cool.
I'm here to see you in a red wig.
All right. So you superheroes, there might be people hopping in and out. I've decided to choose cosmic play for this. I have a wig, which I will probably take off at some point. I also have a futuristic filter to get you in the mood. Yeah, so we're here for an hour to talk about sex with robots. What is the future of human intimacy? At a Tantra festival, it's good to not only talk about the tantras which come to us from the past, right? This essence of where our souls evolved from, and perhaps where we've left some of it behind, and how we can reclaim parts of the self, but also definitely the present. And hopefully that's what you've spent most of the festival engaging in, where you are right now, and doing that little litmus test for how deep is your next breath, everyone. That's up to you, right? You're making a conscious choice as often as you remember. And then also the future. Yeah, so the future of your intimacy, of your sensuality, of your sexuality, what will that look like? And in general, the premise of this workshop is to offer a look into not necessarily having sex with robots, although I wonder if any of you came for that. You can type that in, but rather how our psyche has evolved and will evolve to allow for sex and intimacy to perhaps become either further embraced or further ostracized. And so let's say that there is a start already on this, at least on the ostracization part. If you know, in Japan or Korea, there are dolls inside of orbs. They're holographic, artificial intelligence fueled digital girlfriends. Have you heard about this? Yeah, this is a real thing for about almost 10 years. That largely millennial generation coming home from work, getting text messages from their virtual girlfriend saying, honey, I'm so excited to see you. I'm so excited you're coming home, and really stimulating that emotional response. And this is something that I've been studying for the better part of the last 6 years, is artificial emotional intelligence. And it's something that greatly excites me for the potential for human healing. So you can think of Bloom or a few of these AI apps in the psychology realm of the phone. you know, like people who are on the brink of suicide and whatnot, have someone to reach out to deeply connect with. And yet, of course, when we take it to the extreme and we put all of our emotional eggs in one basket, it's definitely concerning. Yeah. So I'll take my wig off to unveil that there is no better way than natural to be able to kind of settle into real human connection. And my hope is that you've spent some of the time this week at this incredible online festival tapping into workshops that will provide you understanding of how you can be more natural, how you can be more in your body, how you can be more at one with your sense of intimacy and your desire, as well as, if you were at my lecture the other night, you know, stewarding a sense of trauma so it doesn't leak into your tantra. So with all of that said, this perhaps won't be such a personal lecture for you, although it might. Let's see where we go. I'm here to really talk about the entire sphere of the human psyche when it comes to deepening into how we will co-evolve with technology in the realm of intimacy. So I saw a comment in the chat here that says the new era of the blow-up doll in reference to those digital virtual girlfriends, we could say. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's any actual sex going on, right, between your AI girlfriend who's in a jar and you, but it's at a massive kind of tipping point, I would say. I don't think that blow-up dolls will necessarily go out of style. I'm not privy to the sales pitch on them, but I do know that up and coming sex websites on all realms, whether they're selling toys or whether it's a porn site or whatever it is, are only escalating in usage as obviously data becomes cheaper and more available worldwide. And so we do have to look at the effect of the internet upon human evolution and sex. Did any of you see the wonderful documentary called Raised on Porn? Give a shout out or put something in the chat if so. It was released, let's say, last summer or so. Last summer, it was a bit of a hopefully viral send around of like, you need to see this no matter who you are or your relationship with porn, because it really goes into detailing the consequences of how we have not only externalized sexual expression, right, and become a witness or a bystander, not only to sexual expression between humans, but to a sense of violence, right, that's ever increasing. And that creates a certain threshold tolerance where what you saw today, you want to see something more intense tomorrow, because if you see the same thing tomorrow, it might not get you off in the same way. And there's a lot of risk to that. And what I will say is that the era of porn is one that has birthed an entire generation of male or female, though we know most users are male, who are completely, it's a bit of an extreme statement, but largely disconnected from body, from capability to actually sit in intimacy, because what is required for intimacy, as hopefully many of you know, is a sense of vulnerability. Yeah. And so something that I practice and study is called de-armoring, and it's a very, very new field. Perhaps you've been exposed to it. There's a lot of, let's say, charlatans or people in the field who are questionable to trust, if I may. And yet, if you find a really good practitioner, if you find someone who's truly embodied and has no unclean dynamics coming out in their practice, it can be a really huge breakthrough point for one's own growth. And that's on the psychospiritual level as well as on the psychosexual level. And so what de-armoring looks like, and we can all do this together as a mini exercise, yeah, is rather than kind of being like this, do you ever find yourself sitting like this, kind of sitting with a shrunken chest, kind of hunched over, you know, kind of armored in that way, where someone comes near you and you flinch and this kind of thing? Well, what de-armoring looks like is really just softening into the body, right? Settling down, having a nice big belly, having the shoulders fully relaxed, almost dripping to the floor, and allowing the neck to be open, right? So there's a very sensual thing about the de-armored physical form. There's this sense of invitation when we stop closing ourselves off to interaction with other humans and rather soften into a sense of existence and possibility, potential. And so this is something that you can definitely practice, not only on your own, but also with a partner, sitting in front of someone and just breathing, right? Seeing how you feel in front of this other human and seeing if, you know, the tendency is to shrink back or close off, or if you can feel like you soften into a sense of being here. And when you go into real de-armoring practice, it will be in the tissues. And in the tissues, you'll notice that there are memories of hardness or holding patterns or closing. And it's very powerful to reinstate or reinteract or trigger those memories so that we can often see where this armor comes from. You know, what was the original trauma, lowercase t trauma. So yeah, I would love to hear from you guys, kind of any interest that you have, maybe Lita or Rob, if there's anything that's at the top of your mind, any questions that you might want to discuss in this space or thoughts. We'll go on from there. So far, we've covered the understanding that this is already happening, that this is something concerning, right? And perhaps that is a call to action for all of you to say, wow, how actually do we want to show up as humans? You know, how can my choices in the realm of human sexuality and agency over my experience and how I share with my friends and yeah, really how I steer the conversation in my own local circle, how that can change the future of humanity. And that's a liberty and a permission that I really want to offer you to inspire you to know that you do have the capability, that rather than just being an innocent bystander on the side of the road saying, oh, this is happening, that if you start to steward the conversation amidst the people that you love in a different way, that you do have an influence on the future of what humanity is evolving into. And so, yeah, please take that as an invitation and inspiration and almost a task. Yeah. So Lita says, I'm interested in the psychological aspects of robots being introduced into our sexual experience, positive or negative. Yeah, so I mean, hopefully I don't need to talk to you guys too much about this because we're at a Tantra festival, but I'll overview it just in case to catch everyone up to speed. When we look at sexual interaction, there are kind of two baseline camps, or let's say even three, right? There's the camp of fantasy, so where sex exists in the mind, right? Where it's a mental pursuit and just the act of something happening or the potency of something happening or the mental stimulation of something is enough to arouse someone and potentially bring someone to a state of climax. And this would be like, you know, your 13-year-old boy who's having his wet dream and then all of a sudden, like, he actually encounters himself with a lover of either gender, and he ejaculates prematurely, and there's that sense of like it was enough building up in the mind. So there's the mental aspect, there is the physical aspect. So this is like friction-based sexual experience where it's specifically friction and the stimulation of nerve endings and neurons that gets someone off. And that is what sex means to someone. So this is sex, maybe hard, fast, that kind of thing. And especially if it's hard and fast, it can also play into the psychological power game struggles, things like this. You can enter into a whole world of BDSM, which will kind of contain both. And then the third camp, which let's say is more ripe for sensuality, would be that of energetic exploration. And this is where Tantra kind of tries to go. You don't necessarily read in tantric texts that you are meant to be pumping hard and fast, right? That's not really a big part of what Tantra is looking for in trying to bring down the potency of the divine during sexual communion. And so if we think about, right, sexual interaction, you can all think about your own personal sexual interaction through your past. Where would you camp most of it, right? And that is a very personal question, and you can sit with it and breathe into it. Yeah. And just that awareness itself is really potent. When we bring robots into the equation, right, we see that technology definitely emits energy and energetic frequency, though it's often electromagnetic frequency that isn't really the tune or the frequency that we're looking for in Tantra. So maybe that third part isn't an option, and we kind of then are offered up only the first two. So there's a sense of fantasy or idealism, that first camp, that a robot could provide to humanity, and that's seen already in the jar-based girlfriends, where she's saying all the right things because she's been programmed to study you and figure out what you like. And so a great example of this is Ex Machina, and hopefully you've seen this film. Stunning film where there is a female robot that's been contrived based upon the object of her desire, or perhaps her target's porn history search. And so you can easily connect and collect data points from someone's desire trail to figure out the buttons to push to get them interested and intrigued. And this is a very dangerous part of how artificial intelligence at large is being used, not only to sell people things, but to control through psychological operations their output in life, right? And more or less their patterning, and tap directly into motivation, human motivation. And so until you're aware of things like this, you are effectively a victim of things like this. And I don't want to tell a victim story, but that is the nature of capitalism, right? We've all become the product. So anyway, the third part of sexual interaction of robots with humans, right, would be this friction-based stimulation. And so I'm not fully up to date on the latest sex toys, so I can't necessarily report on that front, but I would have no doubt that robotics has found its way into the sex toy industry. I mean, something as simple as a vibrator or a dildo does use not necessarily robotics yet, but the precursor, which is electronic stimulation and on-off switch, and ability to kind of jumpstart an external movement that is not stemming from a human. And so will sex dolls become living vibrators, right, which can also speak to you and talk to you and be your dirtiest dreams? And humans have become so externalized and inhumane and disconnected from any true sense of human connection or intimacy that fulfills, or it feels like enough, because we're at that shallow level of existence with life. Because all the technology is there today to make a very humanoid-like robot that you would be able to have sex with, that would speak to you and tell you everything you wanted to hear. But you can imagine someone having sex with that kind of doll, whether it's a male or female. This doesn't have to just be men using female sex robots. It doesn't have to be even heterosexual. In any kind of arrangement, I would say that it really needs a disconnection from the potency of human intimacy, a disconnection from what it actually feels like to be with another loving, breathing, beating human heart. And that is, especially in a post-COVID world where we're going, with massive amounts of isolation that stem from late-stage capitalism. And so this isn't far off on the horizon. And so really my call to action in this lecture is an invitation for you to change the dialogue of how you're thinking about these things, and more than anything, how you're showing up in human relationship. Notice when and where you're keeping things superficial or safe, right? And take that next deep, big breath into your belly. Remember, de-armor your existence. Remember that you're okay here, and see where you can turn up the knob of vulnerability, right? And be seen, and invite others to be seen for humanness, for that sense of fragility. So Rob says, on some level, we're in love with ourselves. Next step of consciousness. I wonder if porn is consciousness enabling humans to be ready for non-energetic connection, human intercourse. Yeah, I mean, at a deeply meta level, I can totally get down with that.
There was some predictive text mistakes in that, but I think you get the idea.
Well, I mean, where I would go with it, from what I read into it, and I could be reading into the predictive text mistakes, is that at some level, I do feel and believe that, we had to get this far into the darkness to remember that this isn't heading in the right direction. And there's a great, I mean, the sexual liberation kind of stems back all the way to caveman time. And there's a great film, and who knows if it's an honest depiction on a psychosocial level, but it's The Quest for Fire. And it's a film that you can even, it's a silent caveman film that you can watch on YouTube. And there's a really explicit part in it that struck me when I watched it the first time, where, caveman's kind of going around fucking any cave woman he can find. And then at one point, as he's taking her from behind, she stops him, and she turns around and she looks him in the eye, right? And she softens into her belly. And there's this, like, he all of a sudden, rather than this penetrative, mindless action of doing, right, and getting something or feeling a certain way, or this kind of monkey ape based thing, he settles and he softens and he sees her, right? And it's this beautiful portrayal. I wish I'd brought it up for this course, but our sexual liberation, not only from kind of the female or the receiver, the yin aspect of the relationship, which again doesn't have to be female, it could be robot, right? That there is this question and this desire of, hey, right, look at what you're touching, feel into what you're touching, remember that there's a soul, that there's emotions beyond and behind and throughout this body, and that invitation is significant. So yeah, if there's a deeper consciousness woven into porn and woven into the way that we've become in order to prepare us for our enhancement, I mean, I don't want to sit here and pretend to have an answer to that, but anything's possible for sure. And that's always, you know, it had to get the darkest just before the dawn. And so as a futurist and a revolutionary, and those aren't words that I take lightly or use as sale pitches, that is a deep part of my Aquarian nature. In the dawning of the age of Aquarius, in this next phase of evolution of humanity, and I sit right now in Oroville, known as the city of the dawn, and the city the earth needs. It is in India, it's an intentional community that for 54 years has been deeply dedicated to the evolution of humanity and the bringing down of what Sri Aurobindo called the supramental consciousness. It's an evolution of how we will be as human and who we will become. And I run an entire institute, the Institute for Aliveness, dedicated to what we call in our little catchy mantra, up-leveling humanity, right? We are here to steward the future human and to evolve consciousness. And so this is what I spend my entire life doing. And in that revolutionary work, it's not only in the realm of sexuality, you could say, right? I'm also incredibly involved in the psychedelic renaissance for us to have an ability to reveal back to ourselves our psyche and invite back in a sense of, you know, what's really going on behind the curtain and what would happen if we had the veil lifted of, you know, stuckness, for want of a better word. What if we got out of our own way and we could see ourselves from the patterns that are running our life, right? And this is what psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and or intentional psychedelic ceremony can do. And then when, you know, when we combine those two worlds, psychedelia and sexuality, it's like even more of a revolution or a potency for unveiling and using both of these spaces as practice spaces, rather than deterministic, therapeutic or procedural, I go here or I do this once and I'm fine. It's like, no, allow this to become a living exploration in my life, allow my life itself to become experimentation. Yeah. And there's many other realms of futurism and of kind of unlocking the potency and the potential for human beings, which, mind you, if you haven't, you know, tapped into the fact lately that you're incredibly lucky to be human in this lifetime, right? And that you've been given tremendous gifts that other animals on the planet haven't, and where we can romanticize and see, you know, the gentle nature of a frog, which is hopping across my room, or the sweetness of a dog, or, you know, the simplicity of a flower, and think of other life forms as magical beings that have this innocence and don't have the troubled, anxious nature. Right. There's also a great amount of beauty and potency to the prefrontal cortex, and the fact that we, uniquely human, as evolved from our great ape ancestors, have, you know, developed this part of our brain, the forebrain, that allows us to think outside of the present moment, to even create a construct of time and to see the bigger picture of existence and the interconnection between all things. That it, yes, becomes a thought process, whereas you could argue with a flower that there's an embodied nature, that a flower just knows the interconnection nature of all things. And yet with the human experience, we have an ability to self-reflect, to think back upon ourselves. And so it is my kind of urge to humanity for us to use that, right? For that to go somewhere. And, yeah, for us to use an inquired nature and an inquired reality to evolve and to blossom. Yeah. So any other thoughts or questions that you guys want to bring up in this space? It's a pretty open space. We can do some exercises if you'd like. Yeah.
I'd like to share something.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned that, you know, it's mostly men that are doing this. And I think about it, like, why? and I guess that, I don't know if this is other men's issue, but the only thing I can think of is that walls keep coming up in relationship. And sometimes it's really not, unless, yeah, I mean, depending on how many walls there are, sometimes you just can't get through them all, or or they don't want to, there's a lack of whatever, trust or whatever on both parties' part. So, and I think that's pretty common in marriage and in male-female relationships. So I'm wondering if these guys are just like, oh, well, fuck it, I'll have I mean, it doesn't appeal to me, like there's no juice in it, but I mean, for me, it's about the energy. So it can't be energy there's no energy in a robot. So, but I could see on some level the appeal, if, from a man's perspective, like, oh, I don't have to work. I mean, I think it's a mission, and it's a good one to do that work. But yeah, anyway, that's my perspective. Because otherwise, how the hell do you justify having a machine that's supposed to give you any joy? Like, it makes no sense.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of machines that give people joy, from a car to a jet
True.
ski to a record
True.
player. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
So, but you do bring up a really key point, Rob, that I do want to speak into. And that's the question of what got us here. What got us here? Right. So you might think of these walls that you feel coming up in relationship, that it's increasingly difficult to actually get to that point of human connection, where there might just be this, like, throw your hands up in there, fuck it, forget it. Right? I don't need to deal with that. Let me just get off. Right. And that's also a very human thing, because it's a sense of frustration, right, of our 5-year-old that didn't get what it wanted, and has now the adult ability to get what it wants, come hell or high water. And whereas we can go into the ethos of desire and look at why someone wants what they want and what they think the outcome is, if it's just the pudendal nerve and the ability to feel good and get to an orgasmic state, or if it is a deeper sense of connection, which obviously is something that we're vacillating back and forth talking about in this session. And a lot of my work in the world is about emotional intelligence and equipping individuals with the skills for communication, for true communication, because deeply, unfortunately, we were not equipped with them. These are not things that you learned in school. And so we have to first and foremost be able to communicate with ourselves. And I mentioned a moment ago psychedelia and the ability to reveal to ourselves our own psyche, to be able to see the patternings at play and what's going on. And that's I would advocate, a pretty crucial part of anyone coming forth into conversation with another, is like, you have to have checked yourself first before you come into conversation. Because what happens otherwise is we come into conversation full of projection, full of pomp and assumption as to what this person is feeling, thinking, doing, believing. And often it's not true, it's not the case, but rather it's an assumption that we've made based upon our own past experience. Yeah. So this is a common belief, and some of the women in the workshop can perhaps attest to it. Men don't respect women, right? Men are not to be trusted. Men will take advantage of me. And when you look at the number of early childhood sexual exploitation, which is a very high number, I don't have the percentage off the top of my head, but I also, I almost don't want to know, because it's probably much higher than any of us in humanity would be willing to feel okay about. And what happens in the first 7 years of life, whether it is a full-on, fingering or forced sexual experience with an adult, right? Whatever it is, it could also just be like an unwanted glance. And we're humans, we feel energy. And so, like, I remember being a very young girl and having men, somehow pine for me at a young age. And whether it was before 7 or not, what happens in the first 7 years of life is explicitly affecting your entire adulthood thereafter. That is when the subconscious is programmed. Right? It is when your psyche is formed. And so 95% of how you act and react in today's world was formed then, based on belief patterns of how you interacted with the world then. Right? So you can imagine how much bias, let's say, or protection mechanisms women have had to put up, against men. And so until a woman, for example, and this is talking in heterosexual relating, which isn't the only kind of relating, and for the sake of this polarity experience, we'll talk in a heteronormative way, though I acknowledge the limiting perspective on that. So when, a man and a woman are intimate, then she has to sift through all these layers of what's been built up in her psyche. And until she's been given the permission to admit that she doesn't trust men, right, then she's just faking it. And whether that is faking an orgasm or at some level faking intimacy when actually she's rooted deeply in fear, there's a lack of connection that can happen because she's faking it, because she's not really showing up, because she's not following into the vulnerability of who and how she is, whether that's in her physical form and structure. And I know lots of strong women, and yet at the end of the day, men are wired literally with stronger musculature than women for a reason. And this is the beauty of polarity. Women are wired with wider hips and breasts to be able to give life forth. And so there's a big part of our biology that we have to kind of just settle into and see how it's interfaced with our psyche in a very disconnected world. So I'll say that, and then on the other side, right, the other side of the polarity when it comes to men, that there is this tremendous desire, right, that our biological nature cannot be denied. Man is here to spread his seed, full stop. We don't need Genghis Khan to teach us that or illustrate it. It is a biological urge that is within all men as well as women to a certain extent. There's the paternal confusion theory and many other anthropological observations that show that it's in a woman's interest to actually be a slut, as you would say, to sleep with as many men as she can and confuse them all as to who is the father of her children so that they all take care of her children. And she thus extends her social risk network. And so on a man's purview, he definitely wants to impregnate as many women as possible to make sure that he stewards his biological seed and passes it on generation after generation. And we're talking apes, right? But that wiring of the psyche is still there, right? Our hindbrain is still there. The way that we are literally built is still there. All of this is still a very recent history in our evolution. And so for us to deny that or deny our animalistic nature would be to deeply disconnect to the most fundamental part of our flesh and bones. And so until we can own that, right, until we can own what happened in the first 7 years of life. And like I had a friend and past lover who he grew up in a very hippie place, and his mom used to have her friends over for hot tub nights where they used to get into the hot tub naked. And he was a little kid seeing all these naked women, and he developed a fascination with redheads because one of his mom's friends was a redhead at that time. And so you can imagine just the implants that happen in our psyche in the first 7 years of life. And until we can really poke into our desire and poke into our petulances and what kind of drives us and what drives us crazy, take deep ownership for them, look for the roots or the seeds of them in our childhood, into what we're exposed to, into what that might be providing us that often has to do with the opposite gender parent, right? The Oedipus complex, things like this. Freudian psychology was in many ways right on, as many people who might, throw the baby out with the bathwater in denouncing Freud. There was a lot of evidence supporting all of his theories. And so when we look at this pining and this development of our sexuality, and all of you can think about when you were in adolescence or when you were you know, in the age of puberty, like what was going on for you? What were you exposed to? Where were you allowed to explore, and where were you shut down and stifled because you're playing out the result of that in your adult life? And so, and until we can own these two pieces of our innate sexual desire and our biological nature, as well as our inability to communicate and our inability on many levels, our lack of emotional intelligence to divulge a level of honesty, because we're not honest with ourselves, right? And thus we're plagued by these walls that we can describe coming up between us. And so that question of how we got here, how we got to wanting to have sex with robots, right, was because we've crumbled under a pile of uninquired, modern, disembodied humanity. And so when I say that the result of this lecture, my hope is that all of you kind of take into your own hands agency for how you want to evolve your sexual nature, how you want to, inquire into fantasy and wire in a deeper understanding of how each of us can grow in the sexual realm, and how we can evolve, and where our current edge is, and where we can push that edge. And that edge isn't a thicker whip or a thinner whip. Maybe in BDSM, that edge is actually more vulnerability, more human intimacy, more ownership of how we feel. And that is what will touch hearts. And I can give an example. Yeah, Lita, if someone, if you, let's say for the sake of heterosexual relating, a man comes to pick you up at a bar, and he comes over and he starts flirting and trying to be charming and saying, "Oh, you like that? Oh, how's this? Oh, can I buy you a drink?" or whatever kind of game he's playing, versus if he comes up to you and says, "Your eyes really remind me of this girl I used to love when I was 13. And I don't know what it is, but when I look at you, like I feel my heart kind of, the skip a beat kind of thing is a bit cliche, but like I feel something, sensation in my body. And I have a tremendous desire to come and get your number. And I just want to know more about you and potentially be physically intimate with you if that's something that you like." But like that level of honesty is often something that can turn out very well, as long as it's not played with the game. And so whether it is in that first interaction and that first meeting, or whether it is 3 years into a relationship, when you've no longer have that spark, you're not attracted to your partner anymore, there's a lot of frustration from all of the paper cuts that have been unmended, and you find yourself in a place of angst, because for sure you love this person, you've spent the past 3 years of your life with them, but something's not happening in the bedroom. And so to be honest about that, right, without them taking it personally, knowing that it's not often a physical thing, and people will I can be vulnerable with you guys. I had an ex-partner who literally said things to me like, "Maybe it's just your body shape, I'm not attracted to you," right? And that on a very deep level, if I were to take that personally, would hurt. Yeah, like it goes back to all of my early childhood experiences where I wasn't enough, or I disappointed someone, or I was comparing myself to other girls, or whatever it was. And yet the gift of emotional intelligence and the gift of understanding deeply the human trauma arc is my ability to see that he didn't love himself enough and wasn't, in his own space, so that he couldn't be vulnerable and just sit there with layers off, armor off, and tap into the intimacy and get out of his own head. And so he was looking for reasons to find out why, his libido was diminished and essentially externalizing it or blaming it on me rather than fully owning it. And one of the most powerful things that we can do in all of these realms is own it. Whatever it is that we're bringing to the table, own it. Right? There's nothing sexier than owning it, whether it is your own physical body and all of your fat rolls, or like whatever it is, your stench. I mean, that's also shower, but like owning it is sexy. And so this is antithetical to everything that we see advertised to us in the modern world of sex and, you know, whether it's Playboy and Photoshop or airbrushing, or whether it is how women use corsets and, you know, like panties that lift your butt and bring you in. And, you know, this is, whereas there's something very biological to that, because we still, as monkeys, as apes, search for women with wide set hips, small waists, big breasts. Like there's a biological imperative. It means that she is ripe and available and will be a good provider on a very physical, biological level for future offspring. So, you know, like that, my hips don't lie, or booty got back. Like this, there is a decent biological premise that comes from, and there's nothing wrong with that. And yet trying to get implants to fake as if you have those things when you don't is it's not honest, right? It's dishonest. And yeah, so I'll say that for now. Do you guys have any questions? We have about 6, 7, 8 minutes left. Any thoughts, any other things that you want to bring into this conversation? How does this hit for you? Right where you are. What are you going to do? I mean, I can give you a list of things to lean into, kind of homework, assignments, practices to explore. You want to do that?
Practices are always good.
Practices are always good. Yeah, cool. So a good exercise, and you can do this right now if you want. Should we all do it together? You can grab a piece of paper. And Francesca, welcome. I know you've just come in. You can grab a piece of paper, or you can open up the notes file on your phone or your computer. Yeah. Start in your note, and I want you to write desire, turn on. So desire / turn on. All right. And then you're going to type or write 10 things that turn you on. And it can be as simple as like a certain bird chirping or a smell. Right? It can be a fabric or a part of your body that you want touched. Yeah, so 10 things, just kind of let them come out, stream of consciousness, what you're aware of. So to guide you in this, you can think of past experiences, or you can think of right now in this space, what would really light you up. You can think of or feel into what would feel really good right now, as well as what's felt good in the past, whether it is in the mind or the body. As you finish your list, glance back over it. And I want you to put a little check mark or a dash in front of things that are kind of uniquely human, things that you think anyone in this room, right, may have written on their list. And then you'll also see the things that aren't, that are unique to you. Yeah. And my guess is that most of you will find that most of the items on your list were pretty universal. Is that correct? They weren't unique to you. And so we find that, right, this mystery of sex isn't actually that complex at all, that it has a lot to do with presence, has a lot to do with that sense of ownership that we've discussed at length. That has a lot to do with a willingness to connect, embodied, vulnerable in front of another human. Yeah, it has to do with being seen and actually being seen. And that's not something that a robot can ever really do, even though computer vision has stepped up in the world and improved a lot. Being seen doesn't only mean looking at, right? Being seen means being felt, means that deep emotional response. And as much as I could program artificial emotional intelligence to make it seem like the machine is actually seeing you, at the end of the day, it's not. And when we're talking about intimacy and sexual interaction and that human encounter at a subtle tissue level, right, there is a deep lack of ability for a machine or a robot of any sort to step in and take place of a human. And so, yeah, another exercise might be to go through your list of 10. See what was in the body and what was in the mind, right? Of the things that really turn you on, how many were physical and how many were mental? How many were based in fantasy or desire and how many were based in the body? Okay. And then a third exercise, which I'll leave you guys with, is checking out how many of these stem back to an early childhood experience, right? Or how many came from perhaps an adult experience. And yeah, do some delving into the development of your own psychosexuality and what made you how you are, and how can you more honestly express that which you want and desire in the world. Yeah, I hope. That's my desire for you, is to spread this intention in intimacy and this true honesty, as we've said at many points, far and wide, and to own, not only own your attraction, but own your turn on, own your desire, and be an active part of what humans can evolve into, given all we know and all we're capable of. Yeah, and there's a lot of information here in this list. In this very simple list, there's a lot of information. So continue to unpack it at all levels. And perhaps your next lover, sit down with this list and let it be known. You know, everyone can use a how to use guide. Not that they're going to be using you, because there will be that depth of emotional, fragile human connection. And that's what I want for you. So over and out. Enjoy the rest of your festival, everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you so much.